Hi everybody, this is Rob Ariel Clapper here with Get Centered. This is part 4 of our summer series, and I'm going to be talking about uh, the this pattern that we get into, birth and rebirth. And I want to talk about it because we all want peace. We all really, at the end of the day, we just want to be peaceful and calm. And this birth and rebirth process that we're coming into now, spring, summer, it's this fruition of that birth and rebirth. And so in the context of what I'm talking about, what do I mean by birth and rebirth? I'm talking about this I think in the second episode we talked with John, we talked about the beginnings of our life and how we form an identity based on the culture around us, what we're being programmed, what's being programmed into us. And from that, a lot of us in our adult life, or the people that I end up like seeing a lot, we come up against these cycles, these patterns, these repeating patterns that keep us trapped. It's like we don't know. It's that's why we end up in therapy. I was talking about myself too. Is I keep encountering this thing. I keep hitting this same wall over and over and over, and I'm tired of it, right? Or I see that it's causing me a lot of problems, or it's causing the people around me a lot of problems, and I want to move through it and past it. So therapy is the context in which we can start to unravel what those patterns are and maybe where they come from. And I want to say the additional tool that we get in the meditation that supports the therapeutic process is the kind of container. We've talked about that before, that we build for not only the knowledge. First, you have to have the knowledge of the pattern, but then you could get this opportunity that if you can start to work through your practice, you can get a sense of vision and familiarity with what that pattern is and how it's playing out and what starts it, what leads to it, how does it feel when it's happening, and what ultimately resolves it for you. And in that way, you can take this cycle that you're kind of in this birth rebirth series like process where you're kind of like all of a sudden you're angry and then all of a sudden you're yelling, or all of a sudden you're losing your temper, or right, a lot of people, it's like we're talking about heat and temper, and those are the issues that get us in trouble. Or maybe all of a sudden you're jealous, or one of those hot feelings that makes you lose control. And the issue with those patterns is that when we're out of control in that way, even if we recognize the pattern, a lot of times we might feel powerless to the pattern. And so the practice, I want to talk about a way that we can use the practice to almost use this cycle and this pattern to be the indicator itself. It's like it's utilizing the forces of the pattern and recognition of the pattern to become an indicator that you're misaligned. So let's take the example of anger. If you're finding yourself getting angry often, now you're short fuse, you're losing your temper, maybe you're not letting it out, hopefully you're not, but maybe you are. And you've noticed this keeps happening and I don't like it. And afterwards I keep waking up out of this anger fog dream, and like people are mad at me, my kid, like I'm mad at myself. I'm not sure how I got there. I felt out of control while it was happening. And you're saying to yourself in the aftermath, you're saying, how do I not do that again? But then you find yourself again kind of like in the anger moment again later, and you're like, damn, how did I get here? What's going on? And you go to therapy and we talk about what might be going on. But in the practice, there's this opportunity to insert a wedge and use that pattern and start to really get curious, back to part 3 of this series of playfulness and curiosity, to start to use the play, the curiosity, the stance of witness within you to say, okay, how is this happening, right? Curiosity. Well, what if I did this other thing? Well, how about this other way of trying to treat it? And then you can get intimately aware of, what does it feel like when I'm angry, right? What does it feel like before I'm angry, right? Can I start to recognize the feeling that precedes anger and start to work backwards. Like, what can I work backwards from post anger to within the anger to what happens before the anger, and really get to know these are the things that trigger me. These are the positions this is the conversation that I started, or I feel stressed and that stress is coming out in this other way. And like, I'm being angry, but really the thing I'm avoiding is my stress of my upcoming work deadline or taxes coming up or whatever, whatever it is. And to be able to recognize, okay, this is not about the anger. This is about the thing that leads me to be so uncomfortable that I would rather be angry. And maybe I learned that as a valid response in my youth, as a way of expressing myself, or that it worked for me somehow. That helped me feel okay in the world. So you get this chance by using the practice. You do it in the lab setting, right? We do it in the meditation setting where you're not active, you're not having a conversation with somebody else, you're not at work, you're in a quiet environment. And we become familiar with what those patterns are, what the stories you tell yourself are, how that amplifies the problem for you. And then you'll be more aware of it when it comes up again in your life. And you'll be able to then choose differently. You get this wedge inserted because of your awareness, because you have the knowledge, and then you also have this vision. You can see it from a kind of like 360. You can start to notice it as it comes up over and over. You get cycled and recycled. You get birthed and rebirthed. You get thrown around by this pattern. And it's like you are out of control in the beginning, and then all of a sudden you become aware you're out of control. And then you have this opportunity through the practice and the awareness, through your vision of what's happening, seeing yourself from the outside a little bit, or the inside, to interrupt the pattern. And once you are able to interrupt the pattern, you now have an opportunity to start to integrate new ways of responding to the world. And that's where, like, you cannot separate the play aspect out, because that's uncharted territory. This is back to the concept of, like, even internally, John was talking about these conflicts that when we're shaken loose of our cycle, that the conflict, sometimes it's external, but a lot of times it's also internal. You may feel so uncomfortable, and I'll speak from my own experience. I sometimes feel so uncomfortable with the lack of, like, where to go next. It's like, okay, I've interrupted the anger. Great. Oh crap, now what? it's like, where do I go from here, right? And there's a certain sense of, if I'm playful and curious and I say, well, I don't know, let's see, let's see what comes up, or why don't I just sit and play in the dirt for a minute, right? Or maybe today I'm going to stretch, or I'm going to go get a massage, or I'm going to call a friend who I haven't talked to in a long time. And then you can start to choose purposefully how to reroute yourself out of this pattern. So the birth and rebirth process leads to this. If you can notice it, if you can see this keeps happening, this cycle keeps happening, the story I keep telling myself I keep doing it, and you can interrupt it, then you get this chance to come out of that cycle, which can be vicious. Instead of keep doing it over and over and over, you can start to feel, okay, I do really feel the discomfort, right? It's not that I love losing the game. It's not that I love, getting bad news from a client or whatever it is. It's just that this is what it is, and I don't love it, and I feel it, but I'm not going to get angry, right? Why don't I just see how it feels? Why don't I be curious before it gets angry, to see, like, where is it in my body? And, that's my shoulder. Oh, I've been carrying around this shoulder pain for the last 10 years, And then, then you say, okay, well, why don't I go to Leela Scott? Why don't I go talk to somebody who really knows how the meridians work, and have them be able to help me heal that from the inside of my body, so that it has the place to move, so that it doesn't get stuck and locked up in that one particular spot, and help rebalance myself. So there's the elements of the psychological, There's the element of the attention of like how do we pay attention, and which John sort of in episode 2 talked about as soul in some way. I think it's that guiding light. And then there's also the play, and the physical. The physical, how does it land inside my body? And when we can connect all those pieces, that's the key to this freedom out of the cycle that keeps us so trapped, without us being feeling really stuck and not able to move outward from there. So I'm curious what that brings up for y'all.
A lot. I'll go. You're so right. When we notice a behavior, because the emotion in and of itself, right? We don't have a problem with that, right? We've got to have anger. It's got to come out. It's how we express it, right? And who it's affecting in what way. But in terms of just noticing an expression of behavior, we'll use anger since that's the example you used. It's like, okay, now I've noticed it. First step, right? It's always awareness. Now I want to interrupt it, but you're absolutely right. There's this complete vacancy there. You know what I'm saying? Like when you're new to interrupting a pattern like that, what do you put in its place? And I'm just going to quickly, Anna Forrest was one of my biggest influences in yoga. And she talks about this very thing. She's like, people want to quit smoking and they don't know what to do instead, you know? And it's like, so basic, but 3 deep breaths. I interrupted anger, pat on the back, way to go, 3 huge breaths. And then, right, you said some things, call a friend, get out in nature, do something else, right? You don't just leave it empty, because then your nervous system doesn't have a new hook, you know? So that was the one thing I wanted to start with. But then the other thing that you said that was so important is that so often what we're doing in this, you know, second half of life, part of life is that it's something that really worked well for us in the first half of life. It really did. And so that's why we're hanging on to it. And that the awareness itself of it, I can imagine, like, you know, when you turn on a flashlight in the darkness and maybe it has a radius of, you know, or diameter of like this far. And then I imagine awareness and consciousness as making that get bigger and bigger. And like we're collecting all these dark aspects of ourselves that were mysterious to us because we were just operating here. And with the curiosity piece of it, getting curious instead of judgmental about whatever it is coming up, I thought of that, the opportunity to kind of ask it questions, asking of the anger, you know, okay, anger can say, I am the part of you that blank, right? Fill in the blank. What I'm here to show you is blank. What I need from you is blank. And now you have a friend, you have an ally in your anger.
I love that. Yeah, when I'm working with a client, those are the kinds of tools that we use in the practice to work with, you know, where's the wisdom there, right? Because it's not broken, it's not bad to have a reactive nature. We want to be alive and, you know, bubbling. We just want to know, like, is this thing trying to get me to do something else? Like, is there something else there? You know, or like, where is it in my body? Where do you want to hang out, right? Like, or why are you here? What are you here to teach me? Those are so critical. That curiosity switches the whole game. Uh, it's great. Thank you.
That was a great summary of what happens so much in Jungian work, because people have patterns, and are often blaming themselves for the patterns, or the patterns are completely unconscious. And when we realize that the patterns are often there out of a necessity of family of origin or an adaptation or whatever, but what you're saying is once we start recognizing the pattern, then there's the personal responsibility of actually doing something about the pattern and stepping out of that. And you're saying the wedge is the way into that. There's a not a great movie, but a movie, Tom Cruise movie, I think called The Day After, something like that. It's a little bit like a video game where you get to a certain point and he dies, then he starts over. And once he realizes the pattern, then it's like, oh, I have to try something different. Otherwise, the same thing is going to happen. And then he gets a little farther, and then he goes back to the beginning, and then just sort of navigating our way through. And that's pretty much life. Is like we see a pattern, we see usually two black and white extreme ways of reacting to it that we normally do, and then we stop, like you said, put the wedge, get curious, and think, how could I do this differently? How could I imagine? And which is often a trial and error kind of experience, but that we work with it, and that we gradually, like Leela Scott said, our vision and what is illuminated by our consciousness gets wider and wider. But it's a constant process.
Ariel, I was feeling really grateful for your just the way I experienced it when you said makes us lose control, and how that thought, like, control isn't a moral concept, but we do project morality onto it. Like, to stay in control is good. My alcoholism could be a way that I stay in control, and of course that's a parasitic process. It's sucking me lifeless. So but I just couldn't help but have a pretty visceral response to the ways in which we maintain control. And I appreciate how gently you move into those spaces to help. I love that phrase, right? The wedge, to bring curiosity, and curiosity being the wedge. When it comes to just kind of practical, this is weird, practical advice. Is there anything else to add to how, like, if somebody's going through their regular day and they feel out of control? I know Leela Scott said 3 breaths. What else?
Yeah, the 3 breaths is really strong, right? I think for me, the 3 breaths is if you can do that. I think that the challenge that most people encounter is that they don't even know that it happens until it's already happened. And so that's why it's so important to start to get into the lab space of practice, of the mindfulness practice. It's not because I think that like meditation is like the coolest thing or the best, whatever. It's not for itself. It's because what it does is it is the muscle that you will then need to rely on when you're not meditating to be able to catch yourself. So it's just you're going to the gym and you're going to use this muscle, and then, during the day you're going to go lift a box. It's like they translate into one another. And so that's why I encourage people to do the practice, not because of the practice itself, but because of the benefit of being able to then catch it when it's happening, or before it's happening, or even after, or even while it's happening, but at least to be able to catch it. That's the hardest part, is being able to actually be aware in the moment. So if you've already caught it, you're already way ahead. You're way ahead of most people. So give yourself a pat on the back, number one, right? Just recognize that's a big deal. I'd say that is the first place to start. It's a big deal that you're able to catch it. Now, if you don't have the tools to know how to operate differently, that's what we do, right? And that's what we explore in our context. Is we guide you to find your ways. We may give you some suggestions that are proven, or some tools that may have worked for us or that we've seen work other places, but ultimately every person has to find what fits them. So if you can find that curiosity, if you can find that playfulness in that moment, then you're really way, way ahead. You're kind of like, that's how you really start to super interrupt. But it's not going to be my experience is that, first of all, it's a cycle. So expect that it's going to keep coming. You're not going to just resolve it once and for all, probably. Expectations wise, it could, but not always. And then on the other hand, it's saying, this is actually a great place to start. Right now I've recognized it. Now let me see if I can support myself with the tools that I'm going to need in order to be able to interrupt this over and over. So thanks everybody for joining us for this Get Centered Summer Series, part 4 of it. And I hope that if you haven't watched number 1, where we get really an amazing overview of this entire concept, on the many different concepts of how heat interacts with us in this particular time of the year. If you haven't seen episode 2, go watch John, learn about the psychology of how we transform from a young person who soaks up the environment around them to a person who needs to learn how to be themselves in the world and what challenges that brings up. And then episode 3, where you can hear from Gia all about how play, not only for kids, is so important for us as adults, as all human beings need this in order to grow and to thrive in this world. So hopefully you got some great tools from all of us, and we'll see you next time.